Getting started in Power BI, and in today's video we are going to show you how to build your first data model. We're going to build this model, and the good news is you can follow along by downloading the files and follow along step by step on how to build your first data model in Power BI. We're going to start off by showing you what a data model is. What are some of the advantages of having a data model in Power BI? We're going to build relationships. We're going to show you what those relationships are. We're going to show you filter direction and also show you the data model view in Power BI. So get ready, building your first data model in Power BI. Let's go to Power BI. Back in Power BI, in today's video, we continue with our Getting Started series. This beginner's video is going to show you how to build your first Power BI data model. And a data model, in case you're wondering, is a visual representation of how data is structured inside Power BI. We are going to import an Excel file and a CSV file. We are going to create some relationships, and then we're going to show you some of the features in the Power BI model before you even start writing DAX or creating a report. Now, we recently did a video in our Getting Started series on how to get started and build your first Power BI report. I recommend watching that video, but today we are going to show you how to build your first relationships and your first data model in Power BI. Now, one of the things, whenever you're building a data model, you always want to know as a data analyst what your data you're going to be bringing into the model. So the first thing you want to do is take a look at your data so that you're comfortable with what you're bringing into Power BI. This will help you start to form your relationships. So the first thing we're going to do is take a look at the actual data and find out the different columns, the names of the files, and how we're going to import that into Power BI. So let's go to Excel and take a look at our Excel data. Then the second data source that we're going to have is going to be a CSV file, and then we're going to import that into our data model as well. Let's take a look at our Excel data. Building your first data model, it may sound tricky, so we're going to walk through all of the requirements in this video to build that first data model. So let's hop along. Right now we're inside Excel, and we currently have 4 tables set up in Excel. These are going to be labeled. They are structured as Excel tables. If you click inside the product table, it says product. When you go to the customer table, we have customer. We also have a sales rep ID table, and then we have a date table. Those are the 4 tables. They are located inside this Excel file, and these are going to be what's referred to as the lookup tables in our data model. Now, a data model can either be, you've got a fact table, which contains a lot of rows and is generally narrower than a lookup table. A lookup table does not have duplicates. So each of these tables have a different function inside the data model. The date table has the dates January 1 through December 31st, 2024. So every one of those dates is accounted for in the date table. For our product table, we have 5 different products. And even though people can buy many different days, they can buy different products and they can buy different amounts, there's never going to be more than those products. And those products are going to connect to the sales table, which is going to be the fact table. We're going to be taking a look at the fact table next. But this product ID is going to connect the product table to the sales table. The customer ID is going to connect the customer table to the sales table, and the sales rep ID is going to connect the sales rep to the fact table. So we have 4 tables. We're going to import these into our data model and then start to build our relationships. But before we do that, these are the lookup tables. Next, we want to take a look at our fact table inside our CSV file. Building your first data model, we took a look at the lookup tables, which are tables inside an Excel file. Next, you can download these files and follow along in the description. Now we have a CSV file, our second source of data. We are going to be importing this into Power BI, and this is going to be our fact table. Now, fact tables can be long. In Power BI, you can have up to 10 million rows, even more, of data, and those are normally your fact tables. In this data set, we have 1,000 rows of data, which is a smaller data set. It contains the date, and that is the date of the transaction. Then we have the units, how many units they bought. We have the product ID, the customer ID, and the sales ID. And again, whenever you're starting to import into a data model, you always want to get to know your data, be comfortable with what you are importing. If you don't know what you're importing, it's going to be hard to create formulas and build relationships if you are not comfortable and aware what that data is. So in this case, a date is just the sales date. The units is the total units sold. The product ID, every product has a product ID. Every customer has a customer ID, and every sales rep has a sales rep ID. And we're going to connect this in the data model by importing into Power BI. Download the files and follow along. Don't worry, we've got you here. Let's jump in. The fun begins. We're going to import this data and then start to build out our first Power BI data model. Your first data model, the first step is to get to know your data. The second step is to import your data so you can start to build out your model. We already took a look at the data. We have an Excel spreadsheet and we have a CSV file. You can go to the Excel Get Data on the Home ribbon, and the first thing we're going to get is from the Excel file, we are going to get the customer data. And this is the Excel files, the tables that we have for the lookup tables. Now, when you open up select the file and choose to open that up, all of the different tables that are available inside that Excel file are going to appear as a blue icon. So we have 4 of them. We have the customer table, the date table. We're going to select the product table and the sales rep table. And what we're going to do next is transform that data, which will open up the Power Query editor. When you select transform data, the Power Query editor, if you've ever been inside Excel, you may have seen the Power Query editor before. It is very similar. If you're new to model building and this is the first time you've been in Power BI, you're definitely going to want to learn more about Power Query. I do have some videos up on the channel, but we're going to focus in on building out your first data model. Now, our 4 queries are on the left side of the pane. We have the customer, the date, the product, and the sales rep. Next, we want to choose our new data source because we want to bring in from the different data sources. We could bring in Excel, we could bring in SQL Server, we could bring in web data, but we are going to choose the text CSV option. That is going to bring up the sales table, and the sales table is our CSV file. So when we select open, that will bring in the preview. This is a preview of the sales table. It's based on 200 rows. It's comma delimited, and we are going to select the OK button to bring in this fifth data table. So we have two data sources. We have an Excel data source. We have a CSV data source. And this is going to be the basis for our data model. Now, we are not going to make any changes. The only thing we are going to do next is if you go up to the top left-hand corner, you see close and apply. And you have three choices for the submenu. You have close and apply, the apply, and close. Now, if we closed, that would just close out the Power Query Editor. If we selected apply, that would keep the Power Query Editor open and apply the changes, which is loading the data. But since we don't have any additional changes, we are going to close and apply. That will close out the Power Query Editor and it will load the data into the data model. Now you're going to see, depending on how big of a file you have, that is how long it will take to load your data. So it's going through all of the rows, and now if you notice on the right-hand side, we have 5 tables, and now we are ready to build out our data model. So if this is the first time you've ever been in Power BI, I do have a video up called Power BI Getting Started, Building Your First Dashboard. You can watch that. But first off, let's take a look at the 3 main screens inside your Power Query Power BI desktop window. We have the report view, we have the table view, and we have the model view. And the model view is what we're going to focus in on in building your first model. So if you select the model view, that is going to bring in the data model. And you may notice there's already been some relationships built. And I'm going to show you how and why these relationships were built. You see these 1 arrows that go to the sales file from the product table. Then we have the sales rep with a 1 to the sales rep ID. And when you highlight this, we've got the customer ID to the customer ID. And the date table didn't do anything. We have no relationship. The reason why we built out this model just by importing, Power BI is very advanced in looking at your data, and it determined that there was some relationships. Now, some of these relationships could be wrong. So that's why you always want to look at the relationships in your model. Now, how it did that was a function. If you go to File and you go to Options and Settings, and you go to Options, this will bring up all of the different background data, loading of tables, and for the data load under the current file, if you go to the data load, you can see that auto detect new relationships after the data is loaded. Now, if you uncheck that before you load the data, it would not have put in these relationships. But every time you open up a new file, this is going to be automatically checked. If you want to turn that off, you can just turn that off by turning it off. But I'm going to show you how to make and build out those relationships because this may not be turned on in your data file. So we're not going to change anything. We're going to leave this on, but we are going to select OK. Next, remember we talked about our sales table being the fact table, and then we have our lookup tables. And a data model is a visual representation of how your data is structured. So to better look at this data in a more visual format, we're going to move our sales table to the bottom. Then we're going to put above it, we're going to have our product table, our sales rep table, our customer table, and then we're going to move our data table. So our lookup tables are the 4 tables at the top, and our sales table is going to be our fact table. Now, if we select from product, when you highlight this, if we right-click and delete, that relationship is gone. So it says, do you want to delete this relationship? Visuals from using the related tables might be broken. We are going to select yes, because I'm going to show you how to build a relationship from scratch. So we're going to highlight the second one. We're going to delete that. We're going to select yes. We're going to highlight the third one, select delete. And now we're right back to ground zero. And now we're going to build our relationships in Power BI. When you have your data model, remember you can choose to build your own relationships, or you can turn on or off the auto detect relationships. We showed you how to turn on and off the auto detection. Now let's create and build our relationships as if we had had that turned off. So our common field, remember we have duplicates in all of the lookup tables. And the sales table has many different sales on different days, but the product table is unique, the sales rep table is unique, the customer table is unique, and we have a unique date table. So if we select product ID and drag it down to product ID, that will build from the product table to the sales table a one-to-many relationship. And what that means is that the filters go down. So the filters go down from the product table to the sales table. And we'll talk more about this after we build out the relationships. So you just need to click save, and that will build that. Now we have the sales rep ID. We bring that down, sales rep ID to the sales table. We will make that relationship active. This again will be a one-to-many. Then we have a customer ID to the customer ID in the sales table. It is detecting the customer from the first table to the sales table, and it's a one-to-many relationship. And then the final relationship, which even the auto detection did not do, is we want to have the date table, and the common column between the two tables is the date. So date goes to the date in the date table to the sales date table, and we select save. So now we've got the four relationships built out inside this data model. Let's take a look at the rest of this model view, starting off with the properties section. When you select a relationship, it tells you which table, the sales table, is collected. The date column is a many-to-one relationship to the date table, the date column. And if you wanted to turn off this relationship, if you turn this from yes, which it currently is selected, to no, now that relationship is off. And the reason why you may want to do this is you may want to build out your model, and you may not necessarily need all of those relationships active. So we're going to turn this back on so that we can use, if we wanted to build some formulas and DAX. And DAX is the written formula language inside Power BI. Now we're focusing in how to build your first data model. So the filter direction is a couple of choices. You can have a single or both. Now, when you're new to Power BI, you're going to want to keep it so that all of your relationships are single, and both relationships, that is for a little more advanced. Now, this beginner's video is how to build your first data model so that then you could start to build out your visuals, make a report, and make some DAX inside Power BI. And then the final part we're going to take a look now is on the data section. We have a tables section and we have a model section. And the model has four relationships. These are the four relationships that we just built out. We've got the product to the product ID, the sales rep ID to the sales rep ID. And just to clarify, you can build relationships. They do not need to have the same name. Sometimes you'll have relationships where the lookup table has a different name. Now, for understanding the model, it helps if the names are very similar, because for people that are if somebody else were to look at your data model, they would want to know that data. So that's why I always say before you import any data, you look at the data, you make sure you know what all of the columns are, and you ask questions where the data came from before you start to build out your relationships. So we have our 4 relationships. Then we have our tables. And we have our customer table, date table, product table, sales table, and our sales rep table. So those are the 5 tables. Now that's the model view. If you select the tables view, then you can see the tables inside your model. And then for your properties, if you notice, for the sales rep, the current name is D sales rep. Now, one of the things you can do is you can type in a description in case somebody else wants to look at this model. And then automatically, the Power BI Data Intelligence came up with some synonyms, because there are some AI functions in Power BI that helps you build out your data models. So for now, on your first data model, what we have here is we have a key column if we needed to do that. For unique values, you could do a featured table, and then you have this advanced section, which is more for storage mode, and for your first data model, you will not need to use the advanced section. So we have built out our relationships. We've taken a look at the different tables in this model. We've also looked at our model view. We've looked at our 4 relationships, and we've also looked at our 5 tables. Now, if you start to build out measures, then your measure section, your DAX measures, currently it has 0, and we have 0 perspectives. Those are both at 0, and we have 0 calculation groups. Those are other features inside Power BI. They're not necessary for building out your first Power BI model. So we're in the model view. We've built our 4 relationships. We've have shown you the auto detection. And now we're going to show you how those relationships work with inside the DAX measures. Congratulations, you have built out your first data model, but now you may be asking some questions. Well, why did we create those one-to-many relationships? What would happen if I didn't create those relationships? We are now going to take a look at some common things that you'll get associated when you start building out your data models. When you go back to the report view, you now have a blank canvas. And one of the things that you're going to do with Power BI is you're going to build reports, and you're going to build those reports based on DAX formulas. And those DAX formulas, you need to have a model. If you don't build out your relationship model, you will have errors in your formulas, and then you'll have the wrong data. So for example, if we go to the sales table and we create a new measure, and we call this total units, and you do not need to know how to use DAX. We have other videos on how to use DAX. We're going to do a getting started with DAX video that will explain more about DAX, but just to show you how the model relationship works, we're going to build out one DAX measure. So total units is going to equal the sum, and the sum is going to be from the sales table, and it's going to be units. Now, when we close this out with the right parenthesis, this is going to create a measure. And if you notice on the right-hand side, you see total units. If we select total units and we select the formatting, we're going to select the commas so that we can get a nice number. Now we're going to go back to the home menu, And from our visual gallery, we're going to select a card. If we select this card, we can bring in this measure total units by dragging it into the card. So now we see we have 172,000 total units. And that number is correct because the DAX is pulling from, the measure is the sum of the sales units. And if you go back to the model view, you see that we have the sales measure. So now, if we were to build out, we wanted to see the total units by our product. The product table is connected to the sales table, and it's by product ID. If we go back to the report view and I make a table, so we're going to select in the blank area and make a table. Now we're going to bring in our products. So now we have our products, and we're going to bring in our total units. And this shows us 171,564. That's the exact amount. Now, if we format this out, we go to the formatting, we can have the callout value is currently automatic, and we're going to have none. So now we have 171,564, which matches up with the total units. But now if we go back to the model view, watch this. If I select this relationship and delete it, so right click and select delete. We're going to delete this relationship. Now when we go back to the report view, we are missing the individual breakdowns. And the reason why is because we don't have that relationship. The total units only requires one table. So the measure for total units is correct for 171,564. But since we don't have that relationship, nothing connects the product table to the sales table. We can't see the breakdown. So now if we go back to the model view and we select product ID, because we are in the product table, and bring it over to the product ID, we're going to create the relationship again. And when we go back to the report view, now we have the total units by product. And that is the importance of having a data model, because that connection between the product ID is a one-to-many relationship, and this flows down to the sales table. And that is the start of learning how your models and your relationships work inside Power BI. Congratulations, you've built your first model inside Power BI. Let's recap some of the processes and steps that you need to do. The first thing you want to do is you need to know your data. As a data analyst, as a Power BI desktop report creator, before you bring that data into the model, you want to know all of the data, where the data came from, the different columns, and what the column titles mean. So that way, when you bring the data into Power BI, you can start to build out your model. Once you import your data into Power BI, the next step is to build your relationships. Now, early on, when you're building your first Power BI models, you're going to want to have one-to-many relationships, and you're going to have one filter direction. We will do a video in the future on multiple tables and both directional models, but in your first data models, you're going to want to stick to one-to-many relationships. You can have as many lookup tables as you want, but then you're going to want to have one fact table. Now, once you build out your relationships, if Power BI auto detect is on, you're going to want to double check those and make sure they're accurate. Otherwise, you can turn that off when you start a new file, and then you can build out your own relationships. Remember, you do not have to have the same name from your lookup table to the fact table. They can be a different name as long as the data does connect. Then the final thing you're going to want to do is build out a table and double check to make sure that your relationships are working, and do a quick fact check on your relationships. So that is the process of building out your first data model inside Power BI. We recently did a video on getting started in Power BI on how to build your first report, your first dashboard. So I recommend watching that video and watching this video so that you can, if you're new to Power BI, our beginner series, if you want to learn more about DAX, we also have videos on DAX in the channel. Remember, like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment. How did this video go for you? You can download the files and follow along and learn more about Power BI and building out your first model in Power BI.